Hey folks, welcome back to Game Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Right now, it is a beautiful spring day here in northern Wisconsin. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, the temperature is just right. And as I was preparing for these reviews, I thought, what better way to celebrate the beauty and the wonder of nature and the joy in your heart of summer and on a college campus, quite like unremitting existential horror. So today we are reviewing a set of Call of Chulhu products that I think you'll be very interested in looking at. We're going to be reviewing the Horror on the Orient Express box set. And I need to apologize in advance because I do not have my box set with me. It was too cumbersome for me to bring in for this review where we're shooting it right now. Now, if you're like me and you remember the box sets of the days of yore, which mainly TSR would put out, they would vary anywhere from standard book size to about yay thick. Sometimes they were thinner. I remember Birthright had some really thin books in there. And then you get like the big campaign setting ones like Planescape and Birthright, and that were like that thick and had all the books and maps and everything. Well, Horror on the Orient Express has trumped them. This is less of a box set and more of a trunk. It's roughly 8.5 by 11 size, a little bigger to accommodate the contents, but then it's like that thick. It is uncomfortable to carry. Almost double that of most box sets from the days of yore. This is one solid, large campaign, which is set in 1923 and spans most of Western continental Europe. Now, it is a Call of Cthulhu adventure. So, like most adventures, I feel a little squeamish about giving too much away for those of you who are going to play it. I don't want to be the guy throwing spoilers out the door for everybody. So now you know, oh, well, I'm not going to go in that room because that's where the Shoggoth is waiting to eat me. So I'm going to have to dance around these a little bit. But I can tell you the overall framework, what you're doing, and who your opponents are to a certain extent. Now, this is set in 1923, early Jazz era Cthulhu time, as I mentioned, across continental Europe. The adventure begins in 1923 London, where you are given a task by a friend of the characters to go forth and collect pieces of this accursed artifact and then take them to the place where it was created and destroy them. Now, the individual locations along the Orient Express, because let's face it, did they think about the adventures in these places and then go, oh, I'm gonna have the Orient Express go there? Or did they think, what would be really cool is one big adventure set on and around where a train goes? To me, it's the latter. So where they took a look at where the train went and then sort of built the adventures around it. So your stops, if you're so inclined to be interested in these things, include London, Paris, Lausanne, Milan, all of which are contained in the first book, Through the Alps. Then Venice, Trieste, Zagreb, Vinkovic, I apologize if I have mispronounced that, and Belgrade, which are in Book 3, Italy and Beyond. You're wondering what Book 1 is. Hold on, I'll tell you in a sec. And finally, Sofia and Constantinople in Book 4, Constantinople and Consequences. Now, each one of these is chock full with adventure, with non-player characters, with suggestions. There's been a lot of complaints over the years that this is a very railroady campaign. And I know, haha, see what I did there. But that's just what it's called. I think any investigative campaign is inherently a little railroady, where you're going along this path and there are certain things you have to accomplish to get there. This is not a sandbox setting. This is definitely a directed, this is what you need to do sort of campaign. And I think the reason it's called railroady is because it's funny because you're talking about one of the most famous trains in history. Now, if those adventures are not enough for you, there are optional sidetracks that can provide further background, more history, sort of the flashback chapters in books. I'm reminded of Catherine Kerr's Devery novels, where you get like the main plot and then half the book will be told from this past point of view, etc. Now, these optional sidetracks, which I highly recommend because in my opinion, they're some of the most interesting chapters in the books themselves, include the Dreamlands, Gaslight Cthulhu, Dark Ages Cthulhu during the Crusades, and Cthulhu Invictus during the Roman era. And what you can do is intersperse these along the way to give some background on what you're dealing with. None of the events in there should directly inform what your players are currently doing. And honestly, I don't think it would make that much of a difference for the campaign itself, other than a few little moments of, oh, that's cool. I see how that worked now. I always wondered about that. There's also an optional epilogue at the end that is set in modern era as well. Now, one of the nice things about these historical chapters as they go backwards is the fact that they give you pre-generated characters to use. That way you don't have to spend an evening making Cthulhu Invictus characters to play through the Roman era adventure. They're all made for you. And you can just hand them out to your players. You play through that chapter, night, maybe two, and then you get back to the main 1923 campaign. The same goes for the Victorian and the Dark Ages adventure. The modern epilogue for it, you make your own characters for that, and you go forward at that point. There are ways you can intersperse this and sort of ambush your players with some of the ideas. Like, for example, you could finish the main campaign, do none of the sidetracks, and then later on you need a break from that another main story you're telling. You do the Invictus one if you choose. I think it's better if it's strung together like an entire big, nasty trilogy. The cult with which you are dealing is small, but it is one of the nastiest cults that I've ever seen in Call of Cthulhu. It's not really big. It doesn't have its protuberances everywhere like so many of them do, but it is a wicked, nasty little cult, very visceral in what they do, which I like a lot because a lot of the cults in Call of Cthulhu, you're like, I worship the bloated lady. And she's the bloated lady and I worship her. So what do? You can just see like an interview with these cults on Jerry Springer, which is totally a skit I'm going to do in the future, where we occasionally get together and have worship. So basically you're into Nyarlathotep is what you're telling me. Yeah. But this cult has a direction, it has a goal, and it's really got it going on in the right ways. Beyond just the adventure itself, it gives you a lot of information about what the train was like in that era. And it like keeps emphasizing the ultimate in comfort and luxury, so much so you get a sanity point back every time you ride on the train and nothing exciting happens. Then it also deals with some of the history of the era at the time. For example, when you're in Italy, you've got to worry about the black shirts and the rise of fascism, which I think is kind of cool. One of the odder things about this that was probably the worst thing for me to wrap my head around was, not the worst, but the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around, was the fact that it is written for the Call of Cthulhu 7th edition rules, which have, at the time of this filming, only been released in PDF form. Now, there's not a whole lot of difference there. In fact, the conversions are fairly minor. They give you a way to do it at the back of Constantinople and Consequences, and that and the free PDF quick play of it should be able to get you going with 7th edition with no real significant changes to what you do, other than the fact that it's a little freaky when you're used to the earlier edition rules and you see a cultist with a strength of 80, and you sort of have this little pucker moment of, oh my God, that's just a cultist? And then you realize, no, they're multiplying everything by 5 to make it all percentile rather than half of it be 20-sided based, half of it be the percentile based. Beyond that, it's pretty straightforward and easy to wrap your head around. I played in the original version of this campaign back in 1992, I think, and I made it a significant distance in before I died. And so it is, excuse me, as I like to tell people, this one starts out easy. There's not a whole lot of threat to life in the limb, and for those of you who know what's going on with the campaign, you can enjoy that pun or not. It's more of a sanity thing, and then it progressively gets worse and worse and worse. There's one encounter that is a notorious meat grinder that just plows through characters, but if you're smart, if you're clever, and you know what you're doing, it won't be a problem for you to get through this. I've often said one of the keys in getting through Call of Cthulhu, if it's run correctly, is you pay attention. You pay attention to what's going on around you. You pick up on the subtler clues that are there, and then you can go forward and know, well, I'm facing this kind of baddie. There's probably a couple things I need to do to get ready, rather than I kick in the door and you pretend like you're playing a game of Cthulhu Munchkin. Horror on the Orient Express, it is a very large campaign. I could see this easily taking up a year of real-world game time, if not a little bit more. To me, it's presented as a far more stylish campaign than, say, Masks of Nyarlathotep, one of the most famous and often considered the best Call of Cthulhu campaign, mainly because of the background information it gives you. You have maps of the trains, maps of railways and airways through Europe in that era, plenty of atmospheric pieces. There are props you can give to your players, like pieces of that artifact that they can keep and sort of put together so they can see it themselves. Although I can see my players, once they get the whole thing, like making it dance and doing obscene things with itself, just knowing my players as I do. Hi, Josh. So, this is a really rich, atmospheric, complete campaign that I think if you want something that emphasizes the history and what's going on historically and socially in the era, you really can't go wrong with this. Plus, it's just a damn fun campaign to play your way through. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.